"She was meant to be my slave. I want to marry her now," the Duke announced, shocking the court. The torches flared in the gilded hall. Gasps echoed as nobles froze mid-dance. A maid in plain linen stood trembling, her head held high while the Duke, voice steady, defied every rule of blood and rank. But this was no jest. The king's laughter turned to silence. And behind jeweled fans, whispers curled like daggers. If he weds her, he loses everything. What no one knows, what no one dares to speak, is that the servant girl hides a legacy that could shake the very throne. Will love strong enough to defy an empire be enough to survive the price of scandal? Drop a comment below and share which part of the world you're tuning in from today. If you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe for more. The Hall of Mirrors at Versailles blazed with the light of 1,000 candles, their flames dancing in endless reflections across the gilded walls. Outside, the clatter of iron-rimmed wheels and horses' hooves announced the arrival of yet another ornate carriage. Inside, the grand chamber hummed with silk-clad nobles, their jewels twinkling like stars against the candlelight. Elise stood rigid in her plain black dress and white apron, her hands clasped tightly before her as she fought to still their trembling. The Countess de Marenne's voice carried across the marble floor like ice-scraping stone. "Come, girl. Show our distinguished guests how a debtor's daughter serves her betters." The command drew curious glances from nearby courtiers. Lisa felt their eyes rake over her simple clothing, marking every detail that separated her from their glittering world. She kept her gaze lowered, though her spine remained straight as a sword blade. From his position near a towering window, the Duke of Valmont watched the scene unfold with growing distaste. He had long tired of these elaborate displays of cruelty that passed for entertainment at court. His fingers tightened around his crystal wine glass as the Countess continued. "Her sport, see how she stands there, proud as any lady." The Countess circled Elise like a cat toying with its prey. "Though she wears chains of debt instead of gold." Scattered laughter rippled through the crowd, though some faces showed discomfort at the display. "Bow to your mistress," the Countess commanded, her painted lips curved in a cruel smile. "Show them how thoroughly you've learned your place." Lisa raised her eyes then, not to the Countess, but to some distant point beyond the mirrored walls. Her voice came soft but clear. "I serve as duty requires, my lady, but I will not bow to mockery." A collective gasp rose from the assembly. The Duke straightened, his attention fully captured by this unexpected show of dignity. He studied the servant girl's face, the quiet strength in her features, the intelligence in her steady gaze. Something stirred in his chest, a recognition of true nobility that had nothing to do with titles or lands. The Countess's face flushed an ugly red beneath her powder. "Insolent creature. Perhaps you need stronger chains to remind you of your station." She raised her fan as if to strike. "She was meant to be my slave," the Duke's voice rang out suddenly, halting the Countess mid-motion. All heads turned toward him as he strode forward, his boots clicking against the polished floor. "But I want to marry her now." The silence that followed was absolute. Even the candles seemed to pause in their flickering as the assembled nobles processed this extraordinary declaration. Then the whispers began, spreading through the hall like wildfire. "The Duke of Valmont ... a servant girl ... Has he gone mad?" Elise stood frozen, her eyes wide as she met the Duke's steady gaze. His face showed no trace of mockery or jest, only a quiet certainty that seemed to fill the space between them. The Countess recovered first, her laugh sharp and brittle. "My dear Duke, surely you jest. This girl is nothing but a debtor's spawn. Fit only for... She is fit for whatever station her character deserves," the Duke cut in, his tone brooks no argument. "And I have seen more true nobility in her single act of dignity than in 1,000 nights of court revelry." The whispers grew louder, faces turned to one another in shock and speculation. Some nodded thoughtfully, while others drew back in scandal. Through it all, Elise remained still, her heart thundering in her chest as she watched the man who had just turned her world upside down with a few simple words. The candlelight caught the Duke's profile as he moved closer, highlighting the determination in his jaw, the sincerity in his eyes. The crowd parted before him like water, creating a path straight to where Elise stood, still under the Countess's shadow but somehow no longer touched by it. The gasps and murmurs continued to ripple through the chamber, a tide of astonishment that showed no sign of ebbing. In that moment, as Duke and servant regarded each other across the social chasm that had just been bridged, the Hall of Mirrors seemed to hold its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. Shocked silence gripped the Hall of Mirrors. 100 pairs of eyes darted between the Duke of Valmont and Elise, who stood frozen, her heart thundering in her chest. Some of the younger nobles pressed handkerchiefs to their mouths to hide their smirks, while others whispered furiously behind jeweled fans. King Louis, seated on his gilded chair at the head of the chamber, leaned forward with gleaming eyes. His lips curved into an amused smile as he studied the scene before him. "Well, well, my dear Duke," he drawled, his voice carrying across the hushed hall. "This is quite the declaration. Are we to believe you wish to elevate a servant to your noble house?" The Duke stood tall, his shoulders squared. "Your Majesty, I do." The king's laughter rang out, echoing off the mirrored walls. "Then let us put your conviction to the test. I grant you custody of the girl for now. Let us see if your noble intentions survive the light of day." The Countess de Marenne's face twisted with fury, her rouge-painted cheeks growing even redder. "Your Majesty, surely you cannot." "I can, and I do." The king cut her off with a wave of his bejeweled hand. "The girl goes to the Duke's household tonight." 2 palace guards stepped forward to escort Elise. She moved as if in a dream, her feet barely feeling the polished floor beneath them. The whispers followed her like a swarm of angry wasps. "Scandal! Unthinkable! The Duke has lost his senses." Outside, the night air bit cold and sharp. Torches flickered in their brackets, casting dancing shadows across the palace courtyard. The Duke's carriage waited, its black lacquered surface gleaming. Elise hesitated at the door, her breath visible in the chill air. "Please," the Duke said softly, offering his hand. His voice was gentle, nothing like the mocking tone she had grown accustomed to at the Countess's estate. "You need not fear. Mademoiselle Elise." She raised her eyes to his face, searching for any sign of cruel humor, but found only kindness in his steady gaze. With trembling fingers, she accepted his help into the carriage. As they pulled away from Versailles, the Duke sat across from her, his expression thoughtful. "I saw your courage tonight," he said. "The way you held yourself with dignity, despite the Countess's cruelty. That is worth more than any title." Elise's hands twisted in her lap. "Your Grace is too kind, but surely you know this will bring you nothing but trouble." "Let trouble come," he replied with a slight smile. "I have weathered worse storms." A messenger raced past their carriage on horseback, heading toward Paris. Elise caught a glimpse of the Countess's seal on the letter he carried, and her heart sank. The Duke noticed her distress. "The Countess will try to cause mischief, no doubt," he said. "But you are under my protection now. No harm will come to you." The carriage rolled through the torchlit streets of Paris, finally stopping before a handsome townhouse. Servants emerged with lanterns, their faces curious as they helped Elise down. The Duke led her inside, where warm candlelight spilled across polished wooden floors and elegant furnishings. "Marie will show you to your chamber," the Duke said, gesturing to a kind-faced housekeeper. "Not the servants' quarters," he added firmly when the woman hesitated. "The blue room in the family wing." Elise's eyes widened. "Your Grace, I cannot." "You can, and you will," he said gently. "You are no longer a servant, Elise. Whatever comes next, remember that." The blue room was larger than any chamber Lisa had ever occupied. Moonlight streamed through tall windows, illuminating silk wallpaper and a bed draped with fine linens. A single candle burned on the bedside table, its flame reflected in the dark window glass. Lying in the soft bed, Elise stared at the candle's glow. Fear still fluttered in her chest, fear of the Countess's revenge, fear of the scandal to come, fear of the unknown future stretching before her. Yet beneath that fear lay something else, a warm spark of hope, kindled by the Duke's kindness and his fierce defense of her dignity. Sleep eluded her as the candle burned low, casting shadows on the ceiling. But for the first time in years, she felt not just safe, but seen. Truly seen, as a person worthy of respect rather than scorn. That feeling, strange and precious, followed her into her restless dreams. The morning sun cast golden rays through the tall windows of the Duke's Paris townhouse, painting warm patterns across the fine carpets. Elise stirred in her bed, a real bed, not the thin pallet she had grown accustomed to in service. The distant toll of church bells mixed with the sounds of servants moving through the halls, their footsteps and quiet conversations drifting up from below. She sat up slowly, still hardly believing the sudden turn her life had taken. The chamber was modest by noble standards, but to her it seemed a palace with its clean linens and carved wooden furniture. A gentle knock at the door made her start. "Mademoiselle?" A maid entered with fresh water and a simple but clean dress. "His Grace requests your presence at breakfast when you are ready." Elise's hands trembled as she dressed. The Duke's declaration at Versailles still echoed in her mind. Had he truly meant it, or was this all an elaborate jest that would end in more mockery? In the breakfast room, morning light streamed through tall windows onto a table set with fine china. Duke Adrien sat reading correspondence, his dark brows drawn together in concentration. He rose immediately when Elise entered, offering a courteous bow. "I trust you slept well?" he asked, his voice warm but careful. "Yes, Your Grace, thank you." Lisa curtsied, uncertain of her place in this strange new world. Before the Duke could respond, Steward Zhang burst into the room, his weathered face creased with worry. Papers clutched in his hands, he barely acknowledged Elise's presence. "Your Grace, I must speak with you about the accounts." The steward's voice was gruff with concern. "The situation at Valmont grows dire." The Duke gestured for him to continue, though his jaw tightened visibly. "The harvest yields are down again. The roof of the east wing still needs repair, and the debts." Zhang shuffled through his papers. Lady Isabeau's dowry would more than cover everything. Her father has already drawn up the marriage contract. Elise's heart sank. Of course, Lady Isabeau, with her perfect lineage and enormous wealth. She began to rise, meaning to leave them to their private discussion. But the Duke's voice stopped her. "Sit, please," he said softly to Elise, before turning back to his steward. "I will not marry Lady Isabeau." "But Your Grace." "No." The word rang with quiet finality. "I meant what I said at Versailles. I will not trade my conscience for comfort." Zhang threw up his hands in exasperation. "Conscience will not pay the workers or feed the tenants. The estate needs honest management, not a loveless marriage built on pride and cruelty." The Duke's voice remained level, but there was steel beneath the courtesy. Elise sat frozen, her breakfast untouched. Guilt twisted. In her stomach, she was the cause of this trouble. Her presence threatened the livelihood of everyone who depended on Valmont. She opened her mouth to speak, to offer to leave, but again, the Duke seemed to sense her thoughts. "Do not blame yourself," he said gently. "These problems existed long before you arrived." The steward muttered under his breath about ruin and madness as he gathered his papers. But before he could launch into another protest, the clatter of hooves sounded from the courtyard. A messenger arrived, mud-splattered and breathing hard. He carried a letter sealed with the crest of the Duke's uncle, the Marquis de Beaumont. The Duke broke the seal and read, his face growing darker with each Line. Elise watched as his fingers tightened on the paper. When he looked up, his eyes were troubled but resolute. My uncle demands I end this foolish fancy, as he calls it. The Duke's voice was quiet. He threatens to withdraw his support from Valmont entirely if I do not comply. Your Grace, Zhang began, hope kindling in his voice. No, the Duke placed the letter carefully on the table. I will not be moved by threats, no matter who makes them. Elise's heart ached. The Duke's kindness would cost him everything, and she could not bear to be the cause. She watched as he stared out the window, his profile etched with determination against the morning light, and wondered how she could possibly repay such nobility, or live with herself if she allowed him to sacrifice all for her sake. In the early morning hours, Elise found comfort in the familiar routines of kitchen work. Though the Duke's servants initially watched her with suspicion, her deft hands at kneading bread and quiet efficiency soon won their cautious acceptance. The scent of fresh-baked loaves filled the warm kitchen when a footman appeared. Mademoiselle, His Grace requests your company in the garden. Lisa wiped flour from her hands, straightened her simple dress, and followed. The walled garden was awakening to spring beds of crocuses pushed through the damp earth and tender green buds dotted bare branches. The Duke stood by a stone bench, his formal court attire replaced by simpler riding clothes. Good morning, he said warmly. I hope you slept well? Yes, Your Grace. Thank you. Elise's voice was soft but steady. Please, when we are alone, call me Adrien. He gestured to the path before them. Walk with me? They strolled between neat herb beds and dormant rose bushes. The morning air was crisp, carrying the promise of spring. Birds called from the walls, and somewhere a fountain trickled. Tell me of your family, the Duke said gently. I would know more of you. Elise's hands twisted in her skirts. My father. She began, then lifted her chin. My father was once a knight in service to the crown. He fought bravely in 3 campaigns. But gambling debts and poor harvests took our lands. He died of fever 2 winters past, leaving me nothing but his good name, though few remember it now. The Duke listened intently, his expression thoughtful. A knight's daughter. I suspected. There was nobility in your bearing, if not your circumstance. What was your father's name? Sir Michel de Beaumont, though we lost the D with our lands. A hint of pride colored her voice despite the pain of memory. They paused by a bed of early snowdrops. And how came you to know so much of farming? The Duke asked. I noticed you watching the fields as we rode from Versailles. When we lost our estate, we lived in the village. I learned from the farmers there how rotating crops keeps the soil rich, which grains fetch the best prices at market, how to predict the weather from wind and cloud. She hesitated. Forgive me if I speak above my station. No, he said firmly. Your knowledge is valuable, more valuable than empty court gossip. He plucked a snowdrop and offered it to her. Would you share your insights with my steward? The Valmont estates have struggled these past seasons. Later that day, in his study, the Duke and Zhang, the steward, pored over estate accounts. The afternoon sun slanted through dusty windows as Adrien outlined Elise's suggestions. Rotating the lower fields to clover would restore the soil, he explained, and selling our grain at the river markets instead of local ones would bring better prices, even accounting for transport. Jean's weathered face showed surprise then. Consideration. It's sound reasoning, Your Grace, better than some plans I've heard from noble-born advisors. With your permission, I'll begin preparations for spring planting accordingly. As dusk approached, the Duke and Elise found themselves near the small chapel attached to the townhouse. Inside, a single candle flickered before the altar. Without ceremony, the Duke knelt on the worn stones, head bowed in prayer. Elise stood a respectful distance away, watching the candlelight play across his features. In that quiet moment, something shifted between them, a deepening of understanding, a recognition of shared values beyond the accident of birth. The chapels. Peace enfolded them both, noble and knight's daughter. As the candle's flame danced in the gathering dark, the silence held meaning beyond words, his humility before God matching her quiet dignity, his respect for practical wisdom balancing her acceptance of present circumstances. Neither spoke, letting the sacred stillness weave another strand in the bond growing between them. The morning sun had barely warmed the cobblestones when the clatter of hooves and wheels announced an unexpected arrival. Lady Isabeau's elaborate carriage, adorned with gilt scrollwork and her family's crest, swept through the gates of the Duke's Paris townhouse. The footman scrambled to assist as she emerged like a bird of paradise, her sapphire silk gown rustling and jewels catching the light. "Your Grace," she called out sweetly as the Duke appeared at the top of the steps. "I simply had to call upon you after the fascinating spectacle at Versailles." Her smile didn't reach her eyes, which darted about until they found Lisa helping arrange flowers in the entrance hall. The Duke bowed stiffly. "Lady Isabeau, this is unexpected." "Oh, but necessary, I think." She swept past him, her perfume heavy in the air. "I see your acquisition is making herself useful with servant's work. How fitting." Elise straightened her spine but kept her eyes lowered, continuing her task with steady hands. The Duke moved to stand between them, but Lady Isabeau circled like a cat stalking prey. "Tell me, girl," she said, her voice dripping honey-coated venom, "from which noble house does your blood flow? Which great family can claim you as their own?" She laughed, a tinkling sound that cut like glass. "Oh, but wait, you have none." "Do you?" "My father was a knight," Elise said quietly, placing another stem in the crystal vase. "Was he indeed?" Lady Isabeau's eyebrows rose in mock surprise. "How fascinating! And pray tell, what became of this noble knight?" The Duke stepped forward. "Lady Isabeau, you forget yourself in my house." "Do I?" She pulled a folded paper from her sleeve, waving it like a fan. "Or perhaps I simply remember what others wish to forget. Would you care to know what my connections at court have discovered about your charming peasant's parentage?" Elise's hands trembled slightly, but she lifted her chin. The Duke's jaw tightened as Lady Isabeau unfolded the paper with elaborate care. "It seems your father earned quite a reputation in the debtor's prison," she read with relish. "Such colorful tales of his fall from grace. The gambling, the unpaid loans, the shame he brought upon his name, before he abandoned his family to flee to the colonies." She looked up, eyes glittering. "I wonder what His Majesty would think of such a legacy." The Duke's voice was steel. "You would not dare, wouldn't I?" Lady Isabeau tucked the paper away. "The king so despises being made a fool of. And to think he granted his permission for this arrangement, without knowing the full truth of her disgrace." Elise stood very still, the last flower forgotten in her grip. The Duke paced the marble floor, his boots echoing in the tense silence. "Consider carefully, your Grace," Lady Isabeau purred, moving toward the door. "There are those who would see you restored to your proper place in society with a wife of suitable breeding. And there are those who would watch you fall, dragged down by a common girl's shame." She curtsied deeply. "I shall call again tomorrow for your answer." The carriage wheels rumbled away, but her threats lingered like poison in the air. The Duke turned to Elise, his face troubled. "I will find a way." "Please," Elise whispered. "Do not make promises you cannot keep." She set down the flower and fled upstairs, her skirts whispering against the steps. That evening, Elise sat alone by the library fireplace, watching flames dance through tears she could no longer hold back. The warmth couldn't chase away the chill of Lady Isabeau's words or the cold truth they carried. Her father's disgrace would now become the Duke's, unless she wiped her eyes with trembling fingers. The Duke had shown her more kindness in these few days than she had known in years of service. She could not bear to be the cause of his ruin, to see his noble name dragged through the mud because of her common blood. As the fire burned low, Lisa straightened her shoulders, though tears still traced silent paths down her cheeks. She would not add the shame of self-pity to her other burdens. Whatever pain it caused her heart, she would find the strength to do what must be done to protect the Duke's honor, even if it meant removing herself from his life forever. The autumn sun warmed the countryside as the Duke's carriage rattled along the rural road toward his family estate. Inside, Lisa pressed her hands to the window, taking in the sight of golden wheat fields and ancient stone walls. The Duke watched, her face brighten with each new view, his own heart lifting at her simple joy. "The harvest celebration begins tonight," he said softly. "The villagers have been preparing for weeks." "I can smell the baking bread already," Elise replied, catching the scent of hearth fires on the breeze. The carriage crested a hill, revealing the sprawling Valmont estate below. Stone buildings clustered around a central courtyard, while meat gardens and orchards spread outward like a green quilt. As they pulled into the courtyard, villagers paused in their work to peer curiously at the carriage. Women balanced baskets of apples on their hips, while men carried casks of fresh cider toward the great hall. Children darted between market stalls decorated with autumn flowers and ribbons. The Duke helped Lisa down from the carriage, her simple blue dress a stark contrast to the fine clothes she had worn at Versailles. Yet here, among the honest work of harvest time, she seemed to glow with natural grace. "Shall I show you the bakehouse?" the Duke asked, noticing her interest in the warm scents wafting from a stone building nearby. Inside the bakehouse, women worked at long wooden tables, kneading dough and sliding loaves into the great stone ovens. They fell silent at the sight of their Duke and his companion, but Elise stepped forward with a warm smile. "Those loaves smell wonderful," she said, rolling up her sleeves. "Might I help? My mother taught me to shape the harvest bread just so." The women exchanged surprised glances, but soon welcomed her among them. Elise's skilled hands quickly proved her worth, and before long, laughter and conversation filled the bakehouse. The Duke lingered in the doorway, watching as she spoke easily with the village women about their families and lives. As evening approached, bonfires blazed to life in the meadow beyond the manor house. The sound of pipes and drums filled the air as villagers gathered for the celebration. Trestle tables groaned under the weight of harvest foods, roasted meats, fresh bread, wheels of cheese, and barrels of spiced cider. The Duke found Lisa among the dancers, her cheeks flushed with joy as she followed the simple country steps. Her laughter rang out clear and true, perhaps for the first time since they had met. The sight of her, so natural and happy among his people, filled his heart to bursting. Raising his silver cup high, the Duke called for silence. The music faded, and all eyes turned to him. "My good people," he declared, his voice carrying across the firelit gathering. "Tonight we celebrate not only the harvest, but also love itself. For here stands the woman I shall wed, not for wealth or title, but for the nobility of her spirit and the goodness of her heart." A hush fell over the crowd as his words sank in. Then someone began to cheer, and others joined in. Soon the whole gathering erupted in celebration, with cries of "Elise! Elise!" rising into the night air. Village women rushed to embrace her, while men raised their cups in toast after toast. As the celebration continued around them, the Duke drew Elise away from the crowd, toward the quiet darkness near the old barn. Stars sparkled overhead like diamonds scattered on black velvet, while the distant sound of singing carried on the cool night air. They stood close together, neither speaking at first. The Duke's hand found hers in the darkness, their fingers intertwining with gentle hesitation. Elise's palm was still warm from her work in the bakehouse, her skin slightly rough from honest labor. "Your people are so kind," she whispered, her voice full of wonder. They see you as I do, the Duke replied softly. Not as the world wishes to see you, but as you truly are. Their hands remained linked as they gazed up at the stars, while hope blossomed between them like a flower opening. To the dawn, the morning sun cast long shadows across the courtyard when thundering hooves echoed through the estate. A royal courier, his blue and gold livery dusty from hard riding, dismounted before the main house. Servants gathered at windows and doorways, watching as the messenger bowed low and presented a sealed letter bearing the king's mark in the study. The Duke broke the heavy wax seal with trembling fingers. Elise stood near the window, her hands clasped tightly, while Steward Jean hovered anxiously by the desk. The room felt suffocating despite its size, the morning light suddenly harsh and unforgiving. The Duke's face grew pale as his eyes moved. Across the page, "It seems," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "that Lady Isabeau has been busy at court." He looked up at Elise, anguish clear in his expression. "The king decrees that if I persist in this marriage, I shall forfeit all influence at court. And you, Elise," his voice caught, "you are to return to the Countess's service immediately." Steward Jean stepped forward, his weathered face creased with concern. "Your Grace, surely there must be some way to appeal." "There is not," the Duke interrupted, crumpling the letter in his fist. "The king's word is final. Lady Isabeau has poisoned his ear with tales of scandal and impropriety." Word spread through the estate like wildfire. Soon, servants gathered in the hallway outside the study, their worried whispers growing louder. Marie, the cook who had taught Lisa her favorite bread recipe, pushed through the crowd with tears. In her eyes, Miss Elise cannot go back there. She cried, forgetting propriety in her distress. The Countess will be cruel to her after everything that's happened. Other servants joined in, their voices rising in protest. "She belongs here." "With us," declared Thomas, the elderly gardener. "She's shown more nobility in her little finger than that Lady Isabeau has in her whole body." Lisa stood silent, watching as more servants crowded the doorway, each adding their pleas. These people, who had welcomed her as family rather than servant, who had shared their knowledge and friendship freely, their loyalty pierced her heart like a blade. The Duke strode to Elisa's side, taking her hands in his. "I will not submit to this injustice," he declared, his voice firm with resolve. "Let them take my influence. Let them whisper their scandals. I would rather live honestly with you than play their false games for 1,000 years." But Lisa slowly withdrew her hands from his grasp. "My lord," she said softly, using his title for the first time in weeks, "I cannot let you destroy yourself for me." Her voice trembled but held steady. "Your estate, your people, they depend on your position. Without your influence at court, how many more families might fall into ruin, as mine did? How many might suffer because you cannot help them?" "Elise, please," the Duke began, but she shook her head. "I was born to my station, as you were too. Yours. Perhaps I forgot that for a while, living in this dream." She smiled sadly. "But I would rather return to bondage than see you lose everything that makes you the good and noble man you are." As evening fell, candlelight flickered in Elise's chamber as she carefully folded her few belongings. The dress she had worn at the harvest festival, her first dance as a free woman. The small book of prayers the Duke had given her. Each item she packed was weighted with memories of joy, now turned bitter. Tears fell silently onto the rough cloth of her servant's dress as she changed out of the finer clothes she had worn these past weeks. In the mirror, she barely recognized herself, the light in her eyes dimmed, her shoulders already bowing under the weight of her return to servitude. A knock at the door made her hastily wipe her cheeks. "The carriage will be ready at dawn," Steward Jean's gruff voice announced. His usual stern tone softened as he added, "The whole household will miss you, child." Elise couldn't trust her voice to respond. She simply nodded, though he couldn't see it, and returned to her packing. The candle burned lower, shadows lengthening across the floor like bars of a prison cell. As she prepared for her return to a life she had dared to dream she might escape, dawn painted the sky in streaks of pink and gold as Lisa climbed into the wooden cart that would take her back to Paris. Her few belongings were wrapped in a simple cloth bundle, clutched tightly to her chest. The morning air was crisp, carrying the scent of fresh-baked bread from the estate's kitchens, final reminder of the happiness she was leaving behind. Duke Adrien de Valmont watched from the courtyard, his jaw set with determination. He had already mounted his finest stallion, its coat gleaming black in the early light. Strapped securely in his saddlebag were precious letters, yellowed with age but bearing seals that could change everything. These testimonials from old soldiers who had served alongside Elise's father might be their last hope. "God be with you, Your Grace," one of the stable boys whispered, handing him a leather flask of water for the journey. The Duke nodded gravely. "Take care of the estate while I am gone." His eyes followed the cart as it rattled down the dirt road, carrying Elise away from him. Once it disappeared around the bend, he spurred his horse toward Versailles. The journey was hard and lonely. The Duke pushed himself and his mount, stopping only when necessary at roadside inns. The letters seemed to weigh heavier with each passing mile. In them lay accounts of how Elise's father had once saved the king's life during a surprise attack, throwing himself between His Majesty and an assassin's blade. The same man had later been ruined by courtiers, who had stolen his wealth through false contracts and corrupt judges at every stop. Common folk whispered about the Duke, who rode as if chased by demons. Some recognized his heraldry and crossed themselves, wondering what could drive a nobleman to travel with such urgent purpose. The autumn weather held fair, though the second morning brought fog that clung to the roadways. The Duke's fine clothes were travel-stained by the time Versailles came into view, its gilded gates gleaming even through the mist. Guards straightened to attention at his approach, recognizing his rank if not his dusty appearance. "I must see the king," he announced, dismounting with stiff legs. "I bear urgent testimony that His Majesty must hear." The wait in the palace antechamber seemed endless. Courtiers whispered behind their fans, some sneering at his disheveled state. The Duke ignored them all, clutching the precious letters. When finally admitted to the king's presence, he dropped to one knee. "Rise, Valmont," King Louis said, studying him with shrewd eyes. "You look as though you've ridden through hell itself to reach us." "Your Majesty." The Duke's voice was hoarse from dust and fatigue. "I bring proof of a grave injustice, one that you yourself will wish to correct." He presented the letters with trembling hands. The king's expression changed as he read, moving from mild amusement to growing disquiet. The accounts were detailed, describing how Elise's father had taken a blade meant for the king, nearly dying in the process. They also named the courtiers who had later conspired to destroy him through false debts. "We remember this man," the king said slowly. "We had wondered at his sudden fall from grace." His fingers drummed against his throne's armrest. "These accusations against members of our court are serious indeed." "They are true, sire, every word." The king's face was unreadable. "We require time to consider this matter fully. Such revelations cannot be acted upon hastily." "But Elise," the Duke began. "Patience, Valmont," the king cut him off. "We shall give you our answer tomorrow. For now, retire and rest. You look ready to collapse where you stand." In his borrowed palace chambers. That night, the Duke knelt beside his bed. A single candle cast dancing shadows on the wall as he prayed, his body aching from the hard ride, but his spirit unbowed. The flame flickered, reminding him of Elise's quiet strength that first night at Versailles. "Lord," he whispered, "grant the king wisdom to see justice done." His fingers traced the rough wool blanket, so different from the silks he was accustomed to. In this moment of solitude, exhausted yet determined, He felt closer to understanding the true meaning of nobility, not in titles or wealth, but in the courage to stand for what was right. Morning light streamed through the towering windows of Versailles throne room, making the gilded walls shimmer like liquid gold. Nobles filled the chamber, their silk gowns rustling as they jostled for the best positions to witness the coming spectacle. Lady Isabeau stood near the front, her emerald dress catching the light as she smiled with barely contained triumph. The herald's voice rang out across the marble floor. His Majesty King Louis. The assembled courtiers bowed deeply as the king entered, settling onto his throne with practiced grace. His eyes swept the chamber, noting every face, every reaction. "Bring forth the girl," he commanded. Elise entered. With quiet dignity, her simple dress a stark contrast to the elaborate court fashion surrounding her. Though her face was pale, she held her head high, refusing to be cowed by the whispers that followed her path to the throne. The Duke of Valmont stood to one side, his travel-worn appearance drawing disapproving glances from the fashionable crowd. But his eyes never left Elise, and his stance remained proud. "Your Majesty," the Duke stepped forward, bowing. "I present not just letters, but witnesses to the truth." He gestured to a group of older men who entered the chamber, veterans of past campaigns, their military bearing evident despite their age. The first veteran stepped forward, his medals glinting. "Sire, I served with Sir Robert, the lady's father. I saw with my own eyes how he saved your Majesty's life during the ambush at Fontainebleau." A murmur rippled through the court. Lady Isabeau's smile faltered slightly. Another veteran spoke, his voice carrying clearly. "The assassin's blade would have found your Majesty's heart, had Sir Robert not thrown himself between. He nearly died from his wounds." The king shifted on his throne, memory darkening his expression. "We remember that day well." The Duke produced the letters, their seals now broken, but still visible. "These documents prove how certain members of the court," his eyes flicked meaningfully towards several nobles who suddenly looked uncomfortable, "conspired to destroy Sir Robert through false contracts and corrupt judgments." The whispers grew louder. Now the scandal was shifting, but not as Lady Isabeau had planned. Instead of Elise's shame, the corruption of her father's betrayers was being laid bare before all. The same nobles who arranged his ruin, the Duke continued, profited from his lands and goods, while spreading lies about his character. The king's face had grown thunderous. Several courtiers began edging toward the doors, but royal guards blocked their escape. Elise stood perfectly still, tears gleaming in her eyes as her father's name was cleared before all. Lady Isabeau's face had lost all color, her carefully planned triumph crumbling to dust. The king rose, silence falling instantly. "We find ourselves moved to action by this testimony. Sir Robert's service to the crown was exemplary, his treatment shameful." His voice grew stronger. "Therefore, we decree that his daughter, Elise, is hereby recognized as noble in both spirit and blood. Her father's honor is restored, his lands to be returned." Lady Isabeau turned to flee, but found her path blocked by stern-faced guards. The king's voice followed her. "Those who participated in this injustice will be investigated thoroughly. Lady Isabeau, your father's part in this matter will not be forgotten." She was escorted from the chamber, her face burning with humiliation. As nobles who had courted her favor just moments before now turned their backs, the Duke stepped forward, taking Elise's trembling hand in his. Before the entire court, he bowed low over it. "Your Majesty, I renew my petition to marry this lady, whose worth has now been proven to all." The king's stern expression softened as he looked between them. "Love that remains steadfast in the face of adversity deserves reward. You have our blessing, Valmont." The throne room erupted in applause, some genuine, some merely politic, but all thunderous. Elise's eyes met the Duke's, shining with joy and disbelief. The morning sun caught her face, and in that moment, even those who had scorned her could See the true nobility that had been there all along. The small stone church nestled in the village could barely contain the crowd that gathered on that bright autumn morning. Sunlight streamed through stained glass windows, casting rainbow patterns across wooden pews packed with villagers in their Sunday best. Even a handful of nobles, now humbled by recent events, stood near the back, their fine clothes somewhat out of place among the simple folk. The church bells rang out 3 times, marking the completion of the traditional reading of the banns. Their clear tones echoed across the village, calling all to witness the union of the Duke of Valmont and Elise. Inside, hundreds of beeswax candles flickered in iron holders, their warm glow adding to the sacred atmosphere. The scent of fresh flowers gathered by village children at dawn filled the air. When Elise appeared at the church door, a collective breath was drawn. She wore a simple cream-colored dress, adorned only with small pearls at her throat, her father's last gift before his imprisonment. Her beauty came not from elaborate trappings, but from the joy that made her face luminous. The Duke waited at the altar, his eyes never leaving her as she walked forward. When their hands joined before the priest, the first notes of a hymn rose from the choir. Soon the entire congregation joined in, their voices swelling to fill every corner of the ancient church. As Lisa spoke her vows, her clear voice carried to the rafters, steady and sure. I do take thee, I-D-R-I-E-N ... The moment the priest pronounced them man and wife, the Duke and Duchess of Valmont, cheers erupted that nearly drowned out the church bells. Afterward, the estate's great hall buzzed with celebration. Whole roasted meats steamed on long tables. Fresh bread filled baskets, and barrels of sweet cider flowed freely. The new Duchess moved among the tables, stopping to embrace the cook who had first welcomed her to the kitchen, thanking the stable hand who had taught her to tend horses. You're still one of us, they told her warmly, though they now added hasty "Your Grace" to their words. I will always be one of you, she replied, her eyes bright with tears of joy. As night fell, lanterns were lit in the garden paths. The Duke led his bride away from the festivities, their fingers intertwined as they walked beneath the gentle glow. The sounds of celebration faded behind them, replaced by the whisper of autumn leaves. They paused beneath an arbor where moonflowers bloomed, white against the darkness. The Duke turned to Elise, his voice soft with emotion. They thought you meant for chains, he whispered, drawing her close. God meant you for my heart. From the village church, bells began to toll midnight, 12 solemn notes marking the end of their wedding day and the beginning of their new life together. Each ring seemed to seal their union, a blessing cast in bronze echoing across their future. Thank you for watching. Stories like this remind us who we are. If something touched your heart, go ahead and subscribe. I'll be back tomorrow with another story that just might stay with you.